Greetings, everybody, and a warm welcome. We have three distinguished speakers here. Dr. Subbarao, former governor of RBI, as many would know. He has successfully handled many crises and has seen us through difficult times. And with his depth of knowledge, clear thinking, and he speaks his mind, which is very good for us as journalists. And thank you, Doctor, for taking time out and accepting our invitation. It's a great honor. Then we have Rama ma'am, not necessarily in this order, but Rama ma'am, she's a cross-sectoral expert, much more than the consumer and market research guru that she's often referred to as. She's on the board of leading companies. We have a long list. She has a deep understanding of the gold policy also, as we've seen. There is this center at IIM Ahmedabad and also with the World Gold Council. That will hopefully, perhaps in this discussion, help us understand if we can leverage gold probably. And then we have Professor MS Sriram, multifaceted Pandit that I often go to, and he's always, though of course he's heads the Center for Policy, Public Policy at IIM Bangalore. He's the ultimate go-to guru, at least as I see it, on reforms, micro lending. And microfinance, he took to even before it became the fashionable term. The financial inclusion became a fashionable term. So thank you, Professor, for taking time out and accepting our invitation. It's a great honor to have you here. Rama ma'am, what will tilt savers to move to spending?
I watch people, and I think that, and I also look at markets which are not the kind of markets economists look at, but the kind of markets that are made of people and people who market to them. I don't believe that the government of India should be the marketing director of most companies. I think that when times are bad or when there is a sales slowdown, everybody says you've got to cut duties here, you've got to do something there. It's almost as if it appears that the government's job is to create the tide that comes in and everybody will do fulfillment. So I don't think stimulating consumption is important. I think that consumption will happen when incomes happen because everyone in India is really keen to consume. If companies say they need to see a consumption stimulus in order to be able to have faith in investing, I mean, I find it hard to buy that story, because if you have not already bet on 1 billion people getting slowly richer, very keen to consume, then I think that a little bit of consumption here and there is a stimulus, is a drop in the ocean. So I think that the top half of India, from all the data that we've seen, particularly the top 20% of India, is where about half your consumption, half to 50% of your consumption occurs. If the government practices the yoga of inaction and doesn't do something to mess with that, I think that there is a section of consumer India which is already in a mood to consume, which already has surplus income. These are very Darwinian times. So those who have it really have it, as we can see in a lot of things that are being bought today. And those that don't have it are in really bad shape. So if there is a stimulus to people, it has to be in favor of life. It has to be the bottom 20% who are dissavers. I completely agree with Dr. Subbarao that something like Narega, which is a self-selecting sample, or the 20% above that, it is about better health. So I would say life, and provide stability so that livelihoods happen, and don't mess with those who can spend. The collateral damage of income tax notices to make up deficits at this point in time, and so on and so forth, as well as policy flip-flops, which make companies nervous and not willing to go out and woo consumers. I think yoga of inaction for consumption would be a nice thing to have.
Very important. But Rama ma'am, this when you say that don't mess with those who can spend, I mean, are you referring to any messing that we've done?
No, I think there's always collateral damage on everything that we do, right? So if you decide at this point in time that you're going to have to look at all the past GST arrears, you're going to look at service tax arrears of 5 years ago and 10 years ago, things like that. I mean, it may be good if you have sources of revenue, but maybe this is not the right time to do things that don't need to be done at this point in time.
I completely agree with her. The stimulating consumption is not important now. As much as I said the government should be spending more, An important decision the government has to make is whether to spend on consumption or supporting consumption or supporting production, because there's only so much of resources. Resources are limited. So if the choice has to be made, I think it will be wiser to spend supporting production rather than supporting consumption. And here's the reason. The poor in the country, as much as they've had the worst impact of the crisis, have run down their savings. Now, if you put money in their hands now, they're not going to spend it. They're going to build their savings. The purpose of stimulus will be defeated, because if you put money in the hands of the poor, you want them to spend. If they don't spend, there's no stimulus. So since the government's resources are limited, it should be spending on supporting production, because that will support jobs, that will give incomes, that will spur consumption. So that, I believe, will be a more durable way for the government to spend its limited resources. Between supporting consumption and supporting production, I think the choice has to be decidedly in favor of supporting production. Thank you.
So supporting production, Doctor, would it mean like tinkering with the GST rates, things like this?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think GST rate is something to touch right now, because that is across the board. It's what they call, blunt instrument. I think there should be more specific, more tailored instruments in this crisis. Like Rama made this point, it is the lower half which have been hit. Within the production sector, it is the MSMEs and the informal sector that have been hit. And the support has to go to them. It's got to be targeted towards them. So what the government has done so far by providing credit guarantee support for MSMEs and for the micro enterprises, I think that's the right thing to do. And they should further that, maybe expand that, and be more innovative in that direction, but not spending across the board. The large industries, the big corporates have been able to withstand the shock, like the Darwin phrase that Rama used. They've been able to withstand the crisis. They've in fact thrived on it.
Yes.
It's the lower half of the production sector that's been hurt, and they need support.
Yeah, very important. Professor Sriram, you are the guru in the microfinance space and also in the whole world of financial inclusion. How can budget therefore help these entities become the engine of growth, as it were? Because as we have discussed so far, I think it's important. They are critical for jobs, livelihoods, and all of that.
If you look at these entities, they're a very small part of the economy. I mean, they're hyped up much beyond their size that they contribute. They're about 1% of the banking system, and forget about the economy. The microfinance institution as we traditionally know them. But nevertheless, they serve a very vulnerable section and a very important section of the society. What this crisis has thrown up is a big divide between the rural and urban poverty. Because in case of rural poverty, we seem to have the institutional architecture to deliver whatever stimulus, assistance that we need to deliver, whether it's through MGI, NREGA, or PDS, or direct cash transfers, PM, etc. So this jam trinity and benefit transfer, as well as other aspects of transfer, we have been able to do that fairly efficiently. And the rural infrastructure has been built up over several decades, and with the Jan Dhan Yojana, it sort of got a capping for all this infrastructure built up. But what looked very vulnerable was the urban poor, because they're not identified, they're all over the place, you can't target them, and you don't even know how to reach them. I think this budget should hopefully, if the finance minister is saying that it will be like never before, I hope it will be like never before for the urban poor, because I don't think policy making for the urban poor has been very coherent. I mean, there's been a lot of policy making for the urban poor in terms of housing and other things, but there is something at the individual level, and people have been talking about the urban equivalent of MG and REG. I don't think that's really viable, but nevertheless, if we are able to do some sort of a dovetailing with the capital expenditure in the urban infrastructure project and projects, and that can be dovetailed with employment generation and livelihood security, and also look at this rural-urban migration patterns, I think that will be really useful.
Doctor, any thoughts on this? For the urban poor, the point which Professor Sriram makes, or Rama ma'am, any thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to ask Professor Sriram myself about whether he can be more specific on what can be done for the urban poor. I do know that the urban poor have taken the brunt of this crisis. We've seen the reverse migration of millions. People estimate 40 million people trudging back home, braving thirst, hunger, exhaustion in the summer months. And maybe some of them have come back. Many of them will come back as the economy revives, because they powered the urban economy and they are required for the urban economy. What can be done to support them? I really do not know, because I'm not clued into the situation now. In the rural sector, as I said, the employment guarantee scheme is self-targeting. But for the urban poor, what can be done is a question. I don't know if this one country, one card, one identity, that gives any clue to how to design an appropriate support program for the urban poor. See, we have to remember that people come to the urban area in search of livelihood, and they stay in the urban area only if they have livelihood. Otherwise, they go back. Now, we don't want them to stay on in the urban area searching for livelihood, right? We want it to be a demand-based supply of rural labor, rural-urban migration. So designing a program is very important. Perhaps Rama or Professor Sriram can throw light on that.
So when I look at the urban poor, I think when it comes to livelihoods, nobody has jobs anywhere in this country, right? So we are a country of casual labor. I think my think tank has put out these statistics often enough. A country of casual labor, petty traders, shopkeepers, and what we call grade 4 employees, which are people who earn a salary, but they're either domestics or are watchmen, liftmen, people like that. I would believe that a minimum wage there would do a lot, because I do think that we get them cheap. We've actually asked people, do you get a job contract and do you get 1 day off in a week? And it's really shocking that nobody even gets 1 day off in a week. So I think that the minute you move minimum wage to 20,000, as was the plan at that time, I think that India one can definitely afford to pay the 20,000. So that's one part of it, is what I would say, because I think there is enough work, but it's not great work. The other thing is that, at least speaking from a city like Bombay or a city like Ahmedabad, I'm not sure, even a city like Pune, I think there's a lot of enterprise. So, for example, there is always the amount of dabbas, the amount of home cooks, even amongst the poor, the child who walks 10 dogs in the morning, anybody who can stitch, who's willing to stitch whatever needs to be stitched. I think there's a lot of learnability, and there is a lot of there's a lot of get up and go. What there isn't is capital. So, for example, even if you want to work late and work overtime and you're a maid, you need the ability to have even a second-hand fridge in your house so that you can cook once a week. I know someone who actually stands at the railway station. Now, of course, the trains are shut, but who actually offers vada pav, whatever she's cooked for the day. Like everybody else in India, in the lower income groups, she is smart. When I ask her, why do you make 3 vegetables and not 2? Why don't you manage your inventory better? She says that there are people who don't like this and don't like that. So I want to make sure that I have enough. Whenever I ask her, why are you wasting money on packaging material? She says, people say, give me more, and then I make a loss. So I noticed, this is just one story, but I've traveled all over India and I see many such stories, and they're all there. But we don't have the equivalent of any kind of either little working capital or what microfinance, Sriram, correct me if I'm wrong, is also working capital for living, right? It's consumption, production, all rolled into one glorious whole, which we don't actually have in the cities. So if we go with Dr. Subbarao's theme of supporting production and not consumption per se, then I would say those who are already in the production game, make them a little more productive. for God's sake, don't raise rates that will raise, because a lot of them spend almost 100 rupees a day when you travel, because you travel through a combination of auto rickshaws and buses and trains and so on and so forth. And make cell phones cheap so that your labor productivity improves, because cell phones are cheap. I mean, it's crazy what the limits to earning are. Pani comes at 5 in the morning, so I cannot do overtime early in the morning. So I think there could be these support production, support them to support themselves in some kind of way is what I would say.
Yeah, I think the making mobile phones cheaper will resonate a lot, because many use the mobile phone. The maids use the mobile phone for, they ensure that their children attend their classes. So I think it's very important.
And also for our own, I mean, we call them and say, don't come today, come tomorrow. Can you come today? Can you come yesterday? So it is a productivity tool.
Yeah, very true. Professor
Sharmaji,
yes,
I have slight two questions for Rama Bijapurkar on this minimum wage. May I?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One is, there is this standard debate the world over about the advisability of a minimum wage. People are concerned in America, for example, the big argument against minimum wage is that it will actually displace labor, because employers will switch to labor-saving mechanisms, probably use technology to displace labor. So it is not labor-friendly, it's actually labor-displacing. It will raise unemployment rather than help employment. The second concern, I'm thinking on my feet now, just when I heard you say about this minimum wage for urban labor, will it not lead to a secondary black market in labor? That if I want a cook, and if I'm enjoined to give him a minimum wage, I might actually take somebody off the market and pay him informally below minimum wage. And there's enough, in a country with surplus labor, like in India, there'll certainly be somebody available to work below the minimum wage. So won't it actually introduce a distortion in what is today a competitive market?
I don't disagree with you on any of that. I can only sort of provide a perspective from the people that I see. I think today it's not a competitive and fair market. It's an exploitative market. I mean, I think that if you look at watchmen who are standing in the heat in their fancy dress or in the cold without a day off, I mean, I think that if policy is meant to reflect the values of a society, then I think that something that changes that is a good thing. Secondly, I think that you're right that technology will displace it. Already is doing. Lockdown has seen a huge increase in these floor robots. The number of people who come to see mine in order to create. But I think we're also a lazy society. So culturally, we will always do this and that and that and that. It's not going to be or. But perhaps instead of, you're right, that instead of 5 people who come and do one thing each, I may actually have 2 people who do more things. So it could displace, but I'm betting on the fact that we never want to do anything ourselves. I think it will create some new markets. It may take some people off the market, but I don't know that we will have a wholesale displacement. And as far as secondary markets are concerned, platforms are already doing that. I think our experience with people like Urban Clap and so on and so forth is that it is actually better for them. A friend of mine who's a cultural anthropologist has done a study called India's New Professions, and I think it adds to dignity. So I don't know where that fits into markets, but I do know that people like to work through platforms because buyer power is a little better for them, or supplier power is a little better as far as they're concerned. And platforms, in order to get the better people, are not taking a lot of money. So I think when the old broker is replaced by a new platform, I think you tend to have more fairness. That's my feeling. I don't know that it's a deep observation.
Sure.
But if I punted, I would punt in that direction.
Okay. To move on to another issue which has actually been uppermost in the minds of many people, and I would put it to all the to the three of you, is that we are this budget will come at a time when we are actually done 50 years of bank nationalization in the country, and we have still faith shaken, shall we say? It's a very strong term to use. In the depositors, I mean, there is only 1 lakh which is insured, and people have put their life saving, and not many dabble into the stock market. At least by many, I mean, the common man, as it were. So, in your view, starting with Dr. Subbarao Garu, what is your view? Is what what is it that the instrument of budget can do to address some issues around, safety of depositors' money? How important is that as a concern, and what is it that it can do?
Kumar, I'd like to come in a little bit before you move on to the banking, because I don't think we have wrapped up the urban poverty completely.
Yes, please do tell me.
Try and address Dr. Subbarao's question, because it's a complex question and I don't think we have an answer. Particularly if you're looking at a policy intervention perspective, and I think we need to try and grapple with that. I don't think we have a solution. If you're looking at urban poverty, there are two ways in which you can look at it. One is look at it spatially, which is earmarked areas like low-income settlements, slums, and so on. So that's one way in which the policy can address. In fact, the Atmanirbhar package of the Honorable Finance Minister has a urban housing program. The question is, how can that urban housing program dovetail with urban employment generation in the construction sector, sort of this thing. That's one way in which you can look at it. Second is the rural-urban, which goes through the mukaddams, through the and these are, at one level they are brokers. At the second level, they get into the team lease and urban clap sort of a thing that gets in. So that is the second where you actually find the rural-urban connect, and there could be policy intervention there. And the third is the entire informal sector that Rama and Dr. Subbarao talked about, which sort of, these are not necessarily migrants. These are people who possibly have been in urban locations for 2, 3, 4 generations and do not have such deep connects. I think these 3 different subsectors where policy intervention could happen. I mean, one way to look at intervention is to also break up the problem to the extent that's possible. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, a very important point. But from the perspective of budget, anything specific that you think for the urban poor can be done? I mean, anything top of mind which you think can be done?
Certainly, if the finance minister has talked about urban housing, how do we look at the urban housing, low cost, particularly for these people? There are, one is new housing, like Telangana government has done, anticipating influx housing for the poor, and a whole range of PPPs that have happened. For example, Pune has a slum rehabilitation authority, which gives extra FSI for, without a single paisa of investment. They're basically saying, you deal with the slum, build a superstructure, and compensate it by extra FSI, which is so multiple things. I mean, it has its own ecological dimensions and dimensions in urban management, water, and so on. But we need to find such this thing for the spatial problem. For the other, I think what Rama said is absolutely important. I mean, how do you deal with get urban clubs and the team leases to more and more social security? I mean, they are the ones which are in the cusp of formal and informal. And how do we get more and more people from the informal to the formal? That's the big ideas that the FM should have. I'm sure she's much better advisors than the 3 of us here.
Yeah, thanks so much. To the other point about this depositors, faith of the depositors in the banks and safety of depositors' money. Any thoughts on this from the 3 experts that I have here? Doctor, starting with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. You started a question with bank nationalization. Certainly, I agree with you that bank nationalization was done 50 years ago in a different context when the challenges were different. In the event, I believe bank nationalization has served a very useful purpose, has delivered in terms of penetration of banking into the vast hinterland of the country. And, the reduction in poverty that we've seen over the last several decades owes to several factors. I believe one of the important factors is the financial intermediation done by public sector banks, particularly pumping rural credit. So public sector banks must be proud of what they have done. But I believe today the situation has changed, the context has changed, the circumstances have changed, the challenges have changed. The question is, do we still need public sector banks today when the financial sector is wide enough and deep enough to conduct financial intermediation without the government being at the driving seat? Now, I say this because the government has other things to do. has more to do with its mind space and with its money. So should the government be continuing with public sector banks? That's the big question. I personally believe that a time has come for the government to draw a roadmap for withdrawing from public sector banks. I'm not going to say it's going to happen today, tomorrow, or in the next 6 months, maybe a 10-year roadmap for withdrawing completely from public sector banking. Although currently the deposit insurance is only for rupees 5 lakhs, implicitly, people believe that their entire deposit is insured because banks are owned by governments. And that's an impression I think that we must get people disillusioned about. Because banks around the world fail. And bad banks which have been badly managed should be allowed to fail. I don't think the government can afford to insure all deposits of all people in all banks. So this understanding has to be very clear that people's safety is restricted to the insurance amount. Beyond that, they have to take the risk. Because the point is this, if the depositors don't take the risk, who take the risk? The risk is taken by the rest of the larger public, right? And vast majority of the people are poor. So to protect the depositors of a particular bank that is failing, the entire country is pooling in that, which means that the vast majority of poor people are putting in their savings to protect depositors of a failing bank. That's not fair. So I believe we must get used to the idea of banks failing. We must get used to the idea of deposit insurance being restricted to the insurance amount. And we must get used to the idea of people shopping around banking so that they take care of their money as much as the supervisors in the government do impose regulation and do supervise, but people have to be vigilant themselves. Thank you.
Doctor, so what should be the reasonable deposit insurance in your view? On what range can it?
No, the RBI, the Deposit Insurance Guarantee Corporation is a subsidiary of the RBI. I'm sure they exercise their mind just now. That's why you see that clarification on the point of fact that we had just now. When I left the Reserve Bank, it was 1 lakh. Sriram had just that's been raised to 5 lakhs. So it's got to keep moving up, but it's also got to keep pace with the amount of premium that people pay, right? So the higher the deposit guarantee, the higher the premium. The premium is hidden from people. If there is no deposit insurance and if there is no premium, if depositors are willing to take a higher risk, they'll get a higher rate on their deposits. Mm-hmm. So their rate of interest that they get on their deposits today masks the premium they pay for deposit guarantee. So in fact, your question raises an idea that people can buy a higher premium, buy higher insurance by paying a higher premium. People who want to take a greater risk can pay lower premium. That's something that can be tailored. But the risk of deposits should be with the banks and with the depositors and should not be generalized to the larger public.
I have an issue. I mean, I agree with Dr. Subbarao in principle, but there is a little bit of a conundrum here. And I think we need to engage with that. At one end, the state has been encouraging people to not use cash, not put savings in speculative instruments, and there's also been don't put money in gold, and there's been a push on banking, both from the perspective of transactions, which is digital this thing, as well as parking your savings. So if that is a push from the state, and I don't get a commensurate safety, and I say that you put the money in the bank, but at the same time, by the way, it's risky beyond a certain limit. I think there is a little bit of a conundrum, and we need to deal with that. I mean, I don't think. I think Dr. Subbarao's point is perfectly valid that we need to learn to take this. So, given that all other instruments that are available in the market are bound to have market risks, hopefully there should be some safe investments.
I always hesitate a million times before disagreeing with Dr. Subbarao. I would tend to go a little bit in Sriram's direction. What I wonder about is that, and these are my personal views, I serve on a bank board, so that this is not at all the views of that. 76% of the poor bank with the PSU. Okay, the private banks don't. If you were to analyze the customer profile of private banks, you will find that they are weighted heavily in terms of the rich. I think more so in this period of time. They are rich and digital banking and an array of products and so on and so forth. So who then serves the poor? I think the private banks say that, oh, we serve the ecosystem, we serve microfinance, and so as a result, we serve the poor. But at the same time, you're pushing Jan Dhan accounts and so on. And so if you say, well, privatize everybody, I don't know that enough people have faith in the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid to even try. So I don't know. But I do know also that we've made payments zero, digital payments added with the giant experiment of the lockdown. And now more and more people are pushing more and more money directly into bank accounts. And even my Dhobi the other day said, Khata mein dal do na. And he said it with so much pride, ki khata mein dal do na. And it's a very, very small sum of money. And the khata is in his village. So I think that it's caught the imagination of people. And in addition to everything else, I think it's dignity, it's convenience, it's a whole lot of things. I've served on the board of NPCI for 8 years, and I think it's just marvelous how one little thing can catch so many people's imagination. So maybe we should actually ensure, since data is always available, maybe people who have a minimum average balance or a maximum average balance of X should be insured by the state. And those of us who are well-heeled who have average balances above that can shop around for our own insurances. So as a bank customer, I find it slightly offensive that even my money can't be safe in banks and I have to shop around for insurance on that. It does bother me about the sign of the times. But I would say certainly insure balances of the poor people you're shoving into banks via digital payments.
And we have our own Atmanirbhar Bharat, and we can't have any discussion concluded without referring to that. How much of that is a popular, is a slogan really? To what extent can it be a meaningful instrument? What is it that the budget can do to actually address this issue and help the, shall we say, the small businesses hungry for growth?
Anything to do with self-reliance is culturally loaded. So I think the first thing the government has to do is to put some cultural meaning into Atmanirbhar Bharat so that it doesn't go back to boycott Lancashire cloth. That's my first point. The other thought that I have around this whole Atmanirbhar Bharat is that, the big consumption booster, this great 50% of GDP that's growing that we talk about, happened on the back of two booster rockets. One was e-commerce and one was China. And both of which are arguably non-Indian. And if you look at something like Amazon, which has been a marketplace, I mean, it is incredible how many small Indian suppliers are on it, including, as I always point out, 6 varieties of packaged cow dung, which certainly didn't come out of any global supply chain, I will tell you that for sure. And, everything. I mean, you can have 6 kinds of grinding machines. All the small suppliers are in there. And these are people who never actually made it to even Crawford Market pavement. So I think the Atmanirbhar has to really, I think the best thing they can do is just put some meaning into it. Because I think if they're saying that let us strengthen Indian business for India and for the world, well, obviously we are completely for it. If Atmanirbhar is narrowly defined as manufacturing for the rest of the world, the last person who got on the manufacturing for the world bus was China, and they broke that bus. So clearly it is worth trying, because the theory is that a small percentage of a large number is a large number. So I think they have to explain it through various initiatives to say that this is not about saying no to globalization, but about building in a particular way. So I think if Atmanirbhar Bharat also links in the small people, or if you fold in MSME, protection is a bad word, right? MSME encouragement into Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think we are pretty much home and dry.
As a slogan and as a reform package, I think it's got important elements, which is 2 things I think we have to improve on. One is brand equity of India. When people say we want to make leverage on India's huge domestic market to also make for export, but export requires quality, and when it's made in India, it's also got to be proudly made in India. So I think we've got to work on improving quality. That's one thing about Atmanirbhar. The second thing is, I believe that we must get more domestic investment, of course, but more foreign investment. Notably, in the case of the supply chains moving out of China, they started moving out not just in the wake of the pandemic, but they started moving out with the Trump trade wars that started about 4 years ago. But much of that movement has been towards other East Asian countries like Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, Taiwan, and not much towards India. Of course, India has moved up the chain of ease of doing business within the regime of this government over the last 6 years, quite a substantial jump of over 50 steps. But we know now that the ease of doing business is not an accurate indicator of the ease of doing business. So Vietnam, for example, ranks below us in terms of ease of doing business, but attracts much more foreign investment, although it's 1/7 of India's GDP. So I think we need to work more on what is inhibiting both domestic and foreign investment. In my view, as much as structural reforms, economic reforms are important, I think governance reforms are very, very important. I can tell a lot of stories about why governance reforms are important from my own experience, but there's no time, nor is this the occasion. But I think we must work on governance reforms as well. So that's when I think we will realize Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think while foreign capital is also important, if you look at the big companies, whether it's Reliance or Piramal's or whatever, I think if you see the recent past, there has been so much of inflation of private equity, and in fact, domestic. When you talk to startups, in fact, they talk of angel investing. The taxation structure very adverse towards angel investors and more favorable to the stock market, really. So I think even domestic capital, to what extent we can actually incentivize them to actually invest in India's story. I think perhaps addressing those and the concerns that you raise are very important. We're running short of time. Just to conclude, since we have experts here and there'll be people wanting to get takeaways in terms of what is it that they expect from the budget, a quick thought in terms of one or two specific measures in the budget that the three of you actually hope to see. Starting with you, Doctor.
Well, I've already responded to that question in response to other questions, but let me put it together here. What I would look for from the budget is the Finance Minister supporting livelihoods by continuing to support employment guarantee, Manrega, spending more on health because that is necessary for securing lives, spending more on supporting credit guarantee for the MSME sector and for the informal sector, and spending more on infrastructure, because infrastructure will lay the foundation for more private investment to come in the future. There is no demand for private investment right now. The private investors are not ready to invest right now, but they will be ready in course of time. The government should lead them by investing in infrastructure to crowd in private investment. And that will also create jobs, raise incomes, and also raise consumption. So in my view, that'll be a win-win.
And Doctor, when she does all of this, spends all of this, you're expecting also the fiscal deficit to come down because the revenues will increase, right?
Revenues will increase, but I don't think the fiscal deficit will come down to the glide path of the FRBM. Fiscal deficit next year will certainly have to be higher than the FRBM glide path that we earlier agreed on. But it's very important that you raise this point, which is that as much as the fiscal deficit has gone off track this year, and for very good reasons, and is expected to go off track next year, and for very good reasons, the finance minister must give some indication in the budget of the fiscal consolidation plan going forward. But I want to say that mere words will not do. Just the promise that I will be responsible in the future will not do. It's got to be a concrete plan about how the government intends to get the economy back on a fiscal consolidation plan. And I also want to say this, that this is not just for the central government. Fiscal consolidation cannot come about unless all the 29 state governments pitch in. So it's got to be a collective center-state effort.
Yeah, we have a 12% now fiscal deficit, including center and state. So I think at least 2% reduction, at least you would think with all of this possible?
Well, I've not worked the numbers.
Okay.
So I'm unwilling to put a number there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. I can't help asking numbers, which is why I'm forced to actually do this. Rama ma'am, your concluding thoughts in terms of one or two specific provisions in the budget, measures in the budget that you would expect?
No big bang ideas, please. I don't think the people of India can take any more upheaval. Signal policy stability. There's been too much flip-flopping before lockdown happened. So if you want to give confidence, then don't flip-flop on policy anymore. More support for broken lives and broken businesses, no support for consumption. And if it ain't broke, please don't fix it.
Okay. Good point. Professor Sriram, your concluding thought in terms of one of the specific measures.
I'd expect a significant amount of capital expenditure to happen. And given that we are talking of agricultural reform, it would be good that this capital expenditure and infrastructure related expenditure happens in the area of building agricultural supply chains. So therefore you sort of kill two birds with one stone. Second, I was saying that if the finance minister can give us one single annual budget, that will be helpful rather than a monthly supplementary budget every month. That over multiple days, right? Because
one big stimulus
and the stability of the policy. At least an annual stability is. Thank you.
Annual stability rather than a monthly stability. Pitch for that. Thanks so much. Thank you so very much for your time. Really grateful to Dr. Subbarao for sparing time, Rama ma'am for your time, and Professor Sriram as always. Thank you so very much again. Thank you.
Thank you.